The MiG-29 is a fighter jet that was developed by the Soviet Union in the 1970s. In aerial warfare, it was intended to be quick, nimble, and deadly in its performance. In this regard, this aircraft is exceptional in its ability to perform its functions, which include flying, turning, and fighting. At the present time, Ukraine employs these very same jets in a contemporary conflict, but they are now required to do an entirely different action, namely, attack targets at a great distance with surgical accuracy. On the other hand, we are facing a significant challenge here. Since this plane was manufactured in 1980, its computers are not even aware of what the global positioning system is. Therefore, it is difficult to understand how such an antique machine can be equipped with modern satellite-guided weaponry. In any case, the Ukrainians have discovered the answer, which is not only straightforward but also extremely ingenious. I'd want to share with you an incredible story that took place in May of this year so that you can have a better understanding of it. On the morning of May 26th at approximately 5:45 a.m., a Ukrainian pilot was getting ready for a mission that appeared to be impossible. The headquarters of the Federal Security Service in Belgorod was the objective of his attack, which was supposed to take place in the headquarters of the Federal Security Service, which is the Russian Security Service. This attack was going to take place in Russian territory. Both a conventional warehouse and a typical military base are not what I am referring to here. I'm referring about the command center of Putin's intelligence agencies in that region, which is a very important and heavily defended target. This is the point at which our story begins to become more exciting. This accomplishment was intended to be accomplished by the pilot utilizing that MiG-29 from 40 years ago, which was carrying French bombs that, in theory, shouldn't even be able to function on that aircraft. I can't believe how strangely they worked. It was an ordinary iPad, the kind you use to watch Netflix or browse the internet, but this iPad was running unique Ukrainian software that did something incredible. The secret to making it work was affixed to the cockpit panel, and it was an iPad. That's right, a regular iPad. Through this process, the information from the current global positioning system was converted into a language that the French bombs could comprehend. Think of it this way: if you were to take a Walkman from the 1980s and figure out a way to make it play music from Spotify, you would have accomplished this. Despite the fact that it appears to be impossible, the Ukrainian engineers were able to accomplish exactly that. The target coordinates were obtained by the iPad, which then utilized its own global positioning system receiver for navigation purposes. After that, the iPad converted all of this information into a format that the bombs were able to recognize and process. And are you aware of something that is even more remarkable about this one? A military integration to accomplish this in the conventional manner would take years and cost millions of dollars, whereas the Ukrainian solution required only a few weeks of labor and a purchase of the tablet for no more than $500. However, let us return to our pilot, because at 6:15 in the morning, he was flying at a height of only 50 meters above the landscape of Ukraine. This was such a low altitude that the turbines of the jets were causing the wheat fields to tremble and the birds to flock together in fear. The reason he was flying at such a dangerously low altitude is due to the laws of physics, and it's amazing to see that Russian air defense systems, particularly the well-known S-400, are able to detect and destroy targets that are 400 kilometers away. However, this is only possible if they are able to see the target, and this is where the curvature of the Earth comes into play. In spite of the fact that a radar is quite powerful, it is not possible for it to see through the planet at an altitude of 50 meters. The horizon of a ground radar is only 25 kilometers. This indicates that our pilot was absolutely undetectable until he got very close to the Russians, but he was in a race against time at that point. Within precisely 3 minutes, he would be required to give up his ability to remain invisible and climb directly into the line of sight of the adversary's defense systems. 2 air-sol modular hammer bombs, each weighing 250 kilograms, were being transported by the aircraft, which was controlled by the French military. In spite of this, it would be nearly unjust to refer to it as a bomb, because the weapon known as the air-sol modular hammer is essentially a nuclear missile. Please allow me to explain the distinction. A regular bomb simply falls. Wings are used by the well-known American Joint Direct Attack munition in order to glide straight toward its target. The French air-to-surface missile, on the other hand, has its own rocket motor, and that makes all the difference. After it's launched, this motor ignites and pushes the bomb to speeds close to supersonic. That's not simply falling with style. It is powered flight that allows it to extend its range to more than 70 kilometers and provides it with sufficient energy to penetrate armored targets. Each of these bombs costs more than most people's houses and can deliver an explosion through a specific window 70 kilometers away. Only 1 meter is considered to be accurate. This bomb was carefully chosen for the mission that morning at 6:22. Our pilot reached the mission's critical point. He exerted a great deal of force on the stick, and the MiG-29 responded. All of a sudden, the nose of the aircraft rose at a 45-degree angle, and the G-forces pressed the pilot against the seat while the altimeter began to spin out of control. Instantaneously, the radar warning receiver in the cockpit erupted in electronic chaos at a distance of 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, and 3,000 meters. An enemy fighter had just been detected by all of the air defense systems in Western Russia, and it was climbing directly into their engagement zone. The nearest S-4-100 system, located in the southeast of Belgorod, began to paint the MiG with its fire control radar. An answer to the problem of firing would be provided by the fire control system in a matter of seconds. However, the pilot had an advantage, a surprise. The Russians had fewer than 45 seconds from the time they were detected until they were able to effectively engage the target, and their procedures were developed with conventional attack profiles in mind. At an altitude of 5,000 meters, the pilot arrived at the launch site, and the iPad displayed the optimal firing parameters. They would never have anticipated that Ukraine would undertake something so insane. 2 sharp thuds shook the fuselage as the AESM bombs were released from the wings. Immediately, he rolled upside down and pulled hard, performing a maneuver that would have impressed even the inventor of this technique in World War I. The MiG-29 curved through the sky, trading altitude for speed as it dove back to the safety of low flight behind him. The 2 bombs followed their path toward the target. Their rocket engines ignited with a flash, speeding them along the ballistic arc toward Belgorod. The global positioning system receivers locked onto the satellite signals, while the inertial navigation systems monitored every slightest deviation. The bombs were now flying on their own, making hundreds of micro changes every second to guarantee they hit their pre-programmed coordinates exactly the same. The move that the pilot had just completed has a name: toss bombing. It was developed during the Cold War when nuclear bomber fighters needed to drop bombs without flying directly over their targets. The physics is simple: climb at a steep angle, release the bombs on an upward trajectory, and then flee while momentum delivers the weapons to the target. Simple in theory, foolish in practice, especially against contemporary air defenses. The Russian response was rapid but futile. 2 interceptor missiles launched from their platforms, trying to catch the MiG-29, but the jet was already back at treetop level, doing evasive maneuvers as it raced back home. The interceptors designed to knock down high-flying bombers couldn't track a target hugging the ground. They passed harmlessly overhead, their proximity fuses, finding nothing but empty sky. Moreover, this is the most important point. One of the S-400's fatal flaws was revealed. When it came to dealing with low-altitude targets that unexpectedly emerged, the system required approximately 10 seconds from the time it detected them until it engaged in combat. Initially, the search radar was responsible for identifying and categorizing the threat. Subsequently, the fire control radar was tasked with identifying the threat and devising a solution for shooting. This sequence worked perfectly against a fighter that was performing a toss bombing maneuver, but it was extremely slow. The missile itself required 3 seconds from the launch command to leave the rail, and then there was still the flight time to the target. This sequence was perfect against high-flying bombers or cruise missiles with predictable trajectories. Even more unfortunate is the fact that the S-4-100 was designed specifically for huge missiles and aircraft and not for small guided bombs. The interceptor missiles are not surgical tools that are designed to intercept precision munitions. Rather, they are huge weapons that are designed to bring down bombers. It would take the explosives less than 2 minutes to reach their intended target. The personnel of the Federal Security Service stationed in Belgorod were completely unaware that this was going to take place. At 6:27, the first armed aerosol modular hammer bomb entered the roof of the Federal Security Service headquarters. Smart bombs were launched in their direction, guided by satellites that they were unable to see and technology that they were unable to stop. As the warhead sank through the upper framework of the building, the fuse, which had been programmed for a delay of 25 milliseconds, counted down with the precision of an electronic device. After After the explosion, the 87 kilograms of explosive material transformed from a solid to a gas in a matter of microseconds. The shock wave extended at a speed of 8,000 meters per second, generating pressures that exceeded 200 pounds per square inch. These forces were sufficient to kill everybody who was inside the building. However, the mechanics of destruction had only just begun to take shape. A phenomenon known as reflected overpressure was brought about as a result of the explosion that occurred inside the enclosed construction. The shock wave ricocheted off the walls and floors that were still standing, causing its destructive power to increase by a factor of 2 or 3. These windows did not simply shatter, rather they blasted outward in a shower of glass that would later be discovered lodged in buildings located 300 meters away. Office furniture became projectiles as a result of this explosion. Confetti made of metal was thrown from file cabinets that were stuffed with confidential documents. A site 20 meters away from the initial impact was struck by the second bomb, which arrived 3/10 of a second after the first explosion. At this moment, the building's structural integrity had already been undermined and continued to be compromised. The walls that were supposed to sustain the load had vanished, and the support columns had been broken. A structure that was already on the point of collapsing was struck by the second explosion, which dealt the finishing blow to the structure. In the form of a destructive wave, the destruction propagated throughout the compromised structure, resulting in what engineers referred to as gradual collapse. As the Federal Security Service headquarters began to consume itself, floor after floor, it began to consume itself. Due to the collapse of the 4th floor onto the 3rd floor, the mass of the destruction was increased. After that, the 5th floor became a part of the cascade. In less than 5 seconds, each collapse contributed kinetic energy to the disaster that was still unfolding. What had been a 5-story building that represented the security of the Russian state has been reduced to a smoldering heap of rubble and secrets. Furthermore, the significance of this attack extends far beyond the destruction that was caused physically. It's not just an office building. The Federal Security Service is much more than that. In addition to being a fundamental component of Putin's government, it is the direct heir to the Soviet KGB. Throughout the entirety of the conflict, this was the very first assault on the Russian intelligence services. First and foremost, it took place at Belgorod, which is located on Russian territory. Assaults that occur within Russia carry. The symbolic weight is extremely enormous. They pose a direct challenge to the Russian narrative, which asserts that the special military operation is a professional battle that is far away and does not affect the average Russian citizen negatively. When air raid sirens sound and buildings explode in a major Russian city, the war becomes undeniable and something happening close to home. This is a deliberate Ukrainian strategy to increase the cost of the war for Russia, forcing Putin to spend political capital and military resources on the defense of his own territory. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this whole operation is what it represents: a new era in warfare, no longer about who has the most expensive weapons, but about who is more creative and adaptable. Ukraine took a 40-year-old fighter jet, added a $500 tablet and $2 million French bombs each, and created a capability that challenges one of the most sophisticated defense systems in the world. And the most ironic thing about all this is that the S-400 itself has now become a target. Its powerful radars are like beacons in the dark, broadcasting their location to Ukrainian electronic intelligence. Russia is now forced to utilize short-range defensive systems to safeguard the S-400 itself. In other words, the shield needs its own shield. This impressive story, which happened in May 2025, shows that we have entered a new era, the era of asymmetric innovation. In other words, small forces with creativity and adaptability can defeat larger and more expensive systems. An era where software and intelligence overcome mere hardware. The future of war no longer belongs only to superpowers with the biggest budgets. It belongs to those who can innovate faster, adapt better, and think outside the box, and all of that started with an iPad stuck to the dashboard of a MiG-29. Please tell me in the comments, in your opinion, what is most important in modern warfare? Is it having the most expensive and advanced weapons, or having the creativity to use what you have in an inventive way? I want to know what you think about this. If you appreciate this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with that person that enjoys similar military stories. See you next time, you